Okay, good. Well, good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to be able to speak to the Silicon Valley Macintosh user group. I'm a little surprised that you all didn't just drop by Tim's house to get information on accessibility, but maybe it's just my fantasy that if you live in Silicon Valley, you can just drop by Tim's house if you have an Apple question. Maybe it doesn't really work that way. I don't know. But it is my pleasure to be here with you all. And you've already done a remarkable thing. Honestly, you don't even know it yet, but you've got this 68-year-old man staying up past 9:30, my bedtime. So good on you. You finally got me energized to get out here and do something at 9:30 my time. This is good for me. All right. So I'm going to be discussing, trying to give you an overview of Apple accessibility on the Mac. Now, there are so many legs to Apple accessibility that I don't even have time to touch on in this presentation. I'm going to be focusing on accessibility for people who are blind, like myself, but there are accessibility features for people who have motor problems, people who have hearing problems, people who have problems of all different types that I do not have time to touch on in this presentation. Even within accessibility for people who are blind, there's a lot available pertaining to the use of electronic braille, for example. There's all kinds of accessibility for the Apple touchscreens on the iPhones and iPads, and there's the watches and HomePods. Every Apple product virtually is accessible to someone who's blind. I don't have time to go into all those, so I'm going to have to limit my discussion and demonstration to the Mac. But before we get to the demonstration part, I need to give you some background so that you have some context for putting this all in perspective, this whole accessibility issue. So let me start out by saying that I was born in 1956. I came along about 3 months plus early. I was extremely premature. I weighed about 2 pounds, and I was immediately invited to spend quite a bit of time in an incubator where they provided me with copious amounts of oxygen, which kept me alive. Unfortunately, while the oxygen was keeping me alive, it was also damaging my optic nerve, which resulted in my complete loss of eyesight. So I've been totally blind since birth, essentially, or since I was in the incubator immediately after birth. And that was the mid-1950s. And when it came time for me to start thinking about going to school around 1960, 61 in there, my parents did some investigating and they found out that in the state where I grew up, which is North Carolina, and it was also true in almost every other state in the United States, most children who were blind at that time went to a residential school for the blind. Our residential school was in the capital of North Carolina, Raleigh, which was about 4 hours or so away from where my parents lived. And so I guess my parents honestly decided, 5, 6 years old is too young to move out. So they did let me move out when I was 18, but not before then. So they decided that they would further investigate, and they discovered that there was one city in North Carolina, Charlotte, that had an experimental program that would allow children who were blind to attend public school. And that's what I did. I went to public school. And of course, I was in a classroom with no other blind people. And my teachers and my classmates really knew very little about blindness. So this presented some interesting challenges and problems. In addition, though, to being in the regular classroom, I've met with a special education resource teacher for about an hour a day. And that teacher taught me how to read and write Braille. And she also taught me how to touch type. Now, I had to learn to touch type because my classroom teacher could not read Braille. And so I had to have a way to turn in my assignments that the teacher would be able to read and grade them. And if you think about it, it's not a problem for a blind person to touch type. In fact, if you take a keyboarding class, or back in the olden days, a typing class, your teacher very likely would have told you, don't look at the keys. Learn to find the keys by touch. You'll type much faster and you'll type much more efficiently. Now, I know good and well that some of you all cheat and look at the keys. And the way I know that is because my wife does that. She looks at the key. But the point is, blind people can learn to touch type, no problem. The problem with typing, using a typewriter or using an inaccessible computer, is that you can't see what you're typing. So you can't edit it, you can't proofread it, you can't review it. And so I spent all of my school years through my undergraduate college years typing my assignments on a typewriter where I could not read what I had written. If I made a mistake, I had to take the page out and start over. Or if I lost my place, start over. I learned a great deal of resilience and patience as a child, getting my homework done. But anyway, around 1979, when I was in a graduate program, in a master's level program, I began hearing about a company in Carpinteria, California, called Street Electronics. It was a little company that had built, developed, and was selling a speech synthesizer for the Apple II computer. Remember, this is pre-Mac days. This is the Apple II. And this speech synthesizer had the ability to speak some of what was sent to the Apple II screen. For example, it could speak information that was presented by the AppleSoft Basic Interpreter. So a blind person like myself could write a basic program and have each line of the code spoken as I typed it in. And then when I ran the program, have the program executed and have the output spoken. So I had a lot of fun writing many basic programs on the Apple II. But then right around that time, things started getting really exciting. There was a couple, they still are a couple actually, by the name of David Holliday and Karen Navy. These two people had recently graduated from MIT in Boston. David is fully sighted, and Karen, like me, is totally blind. Karen was at that time working on a PhD in mathematics. I'm telling you, these people are brilliant. But Karen had to type her doctoral dissertation on an IBM Selectric typewriter. And not being able to read or proofread or check these very long, complex mathematical equations was driving Karen crazy. She was having real trouble getting her dissertation done. Her husband, David, had taught himself a similar language on the Apple II. Knowing David and knowing how smart he is, he probably taught himself assembly language one afternoon or something, I can imagine. But anyway, He wrote a talking word processor for Karen to be able to complete her dissertation. So this meant that the word processor would send the information that she was typing to the screen and would also speak the information through this Echo 2 speech synthesizer. So Karen was able to edit and proofread her dissertation. This was the first time blind people that I'm aware of had access to anything like this, at least anything like this that was affordable, with an Apple II computer and a speech synthesizer and their word processing package, which they eventually turned into a commercial package, and lots of blind Apple users bought them. And there was another blind programmer who wrote a really cool talking program for the Apple II that was a terminal program that allowed blind people to access things like bulletin board systems, CompuServe, Genie, some of the online systems that existed at the time. And that was very, very cool. And so we were all having a great time with our Apple II computers and our speech synthesizer and accessible software. But in 1984, tragedy struck. At least it was tragedy for blind people. Apple introduced a new computer called the Macintosh. The Macintosh was tragic for blind people because it had a graphical user interface. It had these icons on the screen that you pointed to with a mouse, and you clicked the mouse on the icon when you wanted to run a program. And let me tell you from personal experience, trust me on this, pointing and clicking your mouse, if you cannot see the screen, is not an efficient use of your time. Don't bother. It does not work very well. And Apple didn't do anything to make the Macintosh accessible. There was one company that wrote a screen reader for the Mac. The company was called Berkeley Systems. Their software was called Outspoken. But it was very complicated to use, and it just didn't catch on, which brings me to a point I want to make about accessibility. Just because something technically meets the law of being accessible, that doesn't automatically mean it's usable or efficient to work with. And so there's a big difference between accessibility and usability. So that's going to become important in this discussion. So I at least kept using the Apple II for a while. I used it, in fact, all the way through my PhD program, which I finished in 1989. But almost all of the blind people that I knew who were Apple users just really had to move to the Microsoft platform, to MS-DOS and later Microsoft Windows, because there were screen readers being developed for the Microsoft platform. Now, these screen readers were not being developed by Microsoft. They weren't any more interested in accessibility than Apple was, but there were people developing these screen readers and selling them. And they were selling these screen readers that made it possible for a blind person to use a Microsoft computer, an IBM or IBM clone computer back then, made it possible to use one, but the screen readers were almost always nearly as or more expensive than the actual computer was itself. So it quickly became a standard that if you needed accessibility to a computer, you had to buy it, and it was going to cost you a lot of money if you were blind and you needed that. Well, this went on like this for about 21 years, from 1984, when the Mac was introduced, as Linda said, 40 years ago, to 2005. And in 2005, Apple moved its processor from the PowerPC chip in the Mac to an Intel chip. And Apple had been getting huge flack for not having their Mac accessible because they were trying to sell their Macs in the education market, in government entities, and the law simply will not allow you to sell inaccessible computers to these agencies. It's illegal to do it. So Apple finally said, okay, we are going to make the Mac accessible. And, frankly, a lot of people in my world, in the blindness community, a lot of former Apple users were skeptical. Yes, they might make it technically accessible, but will it really be usable? Will it be efficient? Will it be practical? Will it be fun to use? Well, like Apple does sometimes, a lot of times actually in my experience, they surprised everyone by introducing a pretty comprehensive, pretty full-featured screen reader for the Mac called VoiceOver. It was all screen readers, no matter whether they're on the Mac or on Windows or wherever they are, require some learning to learn to use one. None of them are simple, but VoiceOver was right up there on par or better with where the other screen readers were when it was introduced as far as its usability goes, which was a very pleasant surprise for everyone. So the Mac almost overnight went from being inaccessible to being accessible. Unfortunately, there was that 21-year period that I wasn't really able to use the Mac. I came back to the Mac in, 2007, something like that, and really got on board again with it and haven't left it since. I much prefer the Mac to the Windows platform. But I want to demonstrate a little bit about the VoiceOver screen reader so that you can get a flavor for what I'm talking about when I say a screen reader and when I talk about accessibility. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, in a minute, start sharing my screen so that you can see the applications on my screen. And I'm also going to share the sound so that you can hear what I hear in my headphones when I use this auditory interface for the Mac called VoiceOver. And let me begin the screen share, and then I'm going to talk you through what's going on.
Zoom.us, Zoom share, you are screen sharing. You have started screen share. Zoom.us has new system dialog. Zoom.us has new window.
Okay, can you all tell me, can someone tell me, please, did you hear VoiceOver say you started screen share, and is the volume okay on it? Is it too loud or is it loud enough? Can you hear it okay?
It was fine.
It's fine?
Yep.
Okay, excellent, thank you. All right, so we are now, I'm now sharing my screen, and I'm gonna show you some things about VoiceOver quickly here because I know we don't have a lot of time. But before I do that, I'm going to take you back to the 1980s, and I'm going to play for you a sample of what that original Echo 2 speech synthesizer sounded like that we were using on the Apple II back in the day. And I'm going to be curious to see if you can understand anything that it says. I will give you a hint. Try to be listening out for the word chicken leg. See if you can hear it say chicken leg. So here we go with a sample. Let me switch over to it.
Finder. Text edit. Optimus player. Optimus player. 01 echo.mp3.
All right, so I'm gonna
VoiceOver muted.
let you hear the Echo 2 speak.
The birch panels lit on the smooth lamps. Illumina sheet to the dark blue background. It's easy to tell the depth they well. These days a chicken leg is a rare dish.
So that's what the Echo 2 sounded like. That's what we had to use back in the 1980s. And trust me, to me, that sounded like heaven. That sounded like the most wonderful robot garble, drunken sailor speaking from the bottom of an oil drum that I had ever heard. That sounded wonderful to me because it gave me access to what I was writing and editing and to information on terminals, BBS systems, and so on and so forth. You can't imagine how exciting that was for me. I'm going to let you hear just a sample of the current, or it's not necessarily the current. There are lots of synthesizers available these days, but this is the speech synthesizer that Apple developed for its screen reader, and this synthesizer is called Alex. I'm going to let you hear Alex read a little bit, just so you can get an idea of what that sounded like.
I am Alex. I am the voice that Apple created for its voiceover screen reader for the Mac. I am now available on other Apple devices as well. It is an honor to get to speak to the Silicon Valley Mac users group.
So that gives you an idea of what Alex sounds like, and that's the voice that we're actually using right now in this demonstration. I'm going to go back over to maybe the Finder. Let me turn the speech back on. I muted it so that you wouldn't have to hear Alex talk over the other Alex I was playing.
Optimus Player. Finder. Finder. Desktop. Macintosh HD volume.
I'm now on my desktop. Let me slow
the
speed of this speech down. I listen to it pretty fast.
Volume 100%. 90, 85, 87, 60%, 55%, 50%, 45%.
So I'm going to slow it down to about
volume 45%.
40% here.
Macintosh HD volume.
Let me see. I did that wrong. Let me try this again.
Volume 50, 56, 67, 80, 89, 90, 100%.
Playing with volume. That's not what we want to do.
Rather than the speed.
Braille table, English, unified, language, English, voice, Alex, rate 55%.
Now I'm going to
50%, 40%.
Okay, slow that down. Sorry about that. I was on the wrong item there for a second. So I'm at the Finder now. I'm sitting on my desktop. I can query the computer to get some information. I can find out, for example, by pressing a key, that I am
Finder for running applications. Current activity voiceover settings.
I'm sitting at
Actions
the Finder.
available.
There
Macintosh.
are currently 4 running applications, and it gave me a little bit of other information that you don't need to worry about. I can find out about the various windows.
Desktop Macintosh HD volume.
I'm sitting at the desktop, and it's showing the Macintosh HD. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about how the screen reader gives me information about what's on the screen of the computer. I'm going to go over to text edit, and I've got some text here.
Zoom.us, Optimus Player, text edit. Text edit, Alex.
And the way that I got there, of course, was I held down the command key and pressed the tab key to tab around to my various applications. Remember, of course, this is all done from the keyboard. There's no mouse involved in my Mac accessibility here. But I'm going to let Alex speak this text once again that hopefully you can see on the screen in text edit. This is the same text that you just heard, but I'm going to show you how I could work with this text in text edit. So again, I could have Alex speak the whole thing.
Hello, I am Alex. I am the voice that Apple created for its voiceover screen reader for the Mac. I am now available on other Apple devices as well. It is an honor to get to speak to the Silicon Valley Mac users group.
Or I can move through this text a line at a time.
New hello, I am Alex. I am the voice that Apple created for its voiceover screen reader for the Mac. I am now.
Just by using the down arrow key, I can go down to the next line and have Alex speak that.
Available on other Apple devices as well.
I can use the regular Apple keyboarding commands, the left and right arrow with the option key to move by word.
Available on other Apple.
Or I can move backwards.
Apple, other, on, available.
If I wanted to check the spelling of available, I can use the left and right arrow keys and spell it out one letter at a time.
V, Victor.
And if I wait long enough, it'll tell me the phonetic of that character V, Victor, just in case I had trouble telling, was it a V, was it a D, was it an E, was it a C, was it a T, and so on. And I could keep spelling the word.
A, Alpha, I, L, A, B, L, E, Echo,
And of course, if I move one more to the right, I can see that there is a
space.
space. And so I can tell exactly what I have on the screen here without being able to see the screen at all. And I just wanted to give you some idea of how this works. And I get it that this is a very simple, rudimentary example, but there are ways to access websites using the same technology, ways to access email, ways to access all kinds of other apps. There are many Apple developers who have bent over backwards to make their apps fully accessible with this voiceover screen reading technology. And some of these apps are really visual. Like one of my very favorite apps, for example, is an audio app for the Mac called Audio Hijack from a company called Rogue Amoeba. This is a very visual app that lets you add audio features, microphones and speakers and other kinds of audio that you want to play or record on your Mac. And you do it by lining these items up on a screen, just like you were plugging them in, physically plugging them in. But Rogue Amoeba has taken that very visual interface and turned it in to an interface that works perfectly well with voiceover. So a blind person like myself can make sense out of how to use this audio hijack interface. Apple provides some very good guidelines that they ask their developers to follow to make apps accessible, and a lot of apps are. But some apps need a fair amount of tweaking by the developer to make them work well. There are some apps, lots of games and other kinds of apps that simply aren't accessible. There's always more work to be done, and I think there always will be. But Apple has made accessibility one of the cornerstones of its marketing, I guess you could say, that they market themselves as having devices that are accessible to everyone. And they have done a pretty good job of living up to that marketing. Apple accessibility is not perfect. In fact, no accessibility is perfect. Well, what is perfect, right? I can't think of anything right now that I would say is perfect. There is always work to be done, and I'm a huge Apple fanboy, but I am willing to acknowledge what works really well and what needs work. Let me
Finder,
go back
Zoom.us,
over to
Zoom.us,
Zoom here.
Zoom share.
I think I've basically run up on nearing the end of my time. So I want to stop here. I think I've given you a basic idea of what I wanted to present. I'm going to stop the screen share. And I think this would be a great time to see if anyone has a question or comment. And if you do, please just unmute yourself and say, Robert, I'd like to say something. And we'll just do it that way. I don't think that will be too difficult to do. So if anyone has a comment or question, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
How does someone who is gradually losing their eyesight learn how to use the software that you've described this evening?
What a great question that is. And I guess, unfortunately, it has a rather complicated answer. First of all, the Apple voiceover system that I was just demonstrating is available on every Apple device right out of the box. All you have to do is know how to turn it on. And of course, then you have to learn how to use it. But this is one of the things that Apple did that really turned this accessibility industry on its head. They don't charge anything for their accessibility. They just build it in to every product that they make. So there is good documentation on the Apple website about what they offer in terms of accessibility. There are podcasts and books and information out there. There is. I would be more than happy to help in any way that I could in trying to provide good information. But I will freely acknowledge that it is a challenge to move from being able to use a computer visually to using one without vision or to rely on access technology. But that said, it is 100% doable. It just takes some time and effort and patience and determination. And, you know, I'm perfectly happy with Linda sharing my email address with anyone who wants it. And if I can help in some way, help you find materials and information, I am very happy to do that.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Wonderful talk.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Excellent presentation, Robert. Excellent.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Hope I haven't thrown too much at you. I try to keep it pretty straightforward, but it's a lot to cover.
Yeah. In the last couple of years, have you noticed any new things going in either to the Mac or to desktop computers in general that have excited you about the improvements?
Well, I think that, you know, Apple's neural engine, where they're able to do so much image processing and things like that, you can now take, if someone, my sister a while back sent me a document, a financial document that I needed to read, but as sisters do, what she did was she just snapped a picture of that document and sent it to me. And of course, you know, the voice over screen reader can't read a picture. It's not text. It's an image of text. So I ran it through Apple's Image Explorer, they call it, and Apple's neural engine recognized that there was text there, did the optical character recognition on the text, and presented me with a perfectly readable text version of that photograph that she had sent me. And that is incredibly exciting to me because it opens up so many things that have previously been inaccessible. And I think we're going to see tremendously exciting accessibility possibilities with the new Vision Pro device that's coming out. But these Macs with the Apple Silicon, I've got one of the new M3 MacBook Pros. That's what I'm talking to you on right now. These machines are fantastic in terms of their performance, their battery life, their speed, their reliability. And that's doing a whole lot to make accessibility wonderful. I've been using some onboard software to translate speech into text. So, for example, I do a podcast called the Tech Doctor Podcast about Apple accessibility. When I do a podcast, I try to have this software automatically translate what was spoken on the podcast into text and make it available for anyone who is deaf or hard of hearing, who can't hear us talking, but who could read the text. So, oh man, this is an exciting time with huge advances just on the horizon with accessibility. Thank you for that question. It's a great question. Anything else? Any other comments, questions?
Robert, I have a question. My name is Beverly, and
Hi, Beverly.
I also have a MacBook Pro, I'm trying to figure out how you use the keyboard because it's so smooth. Or do you have a separate keyboard?
No, I'm just using the regular keyboard on the MacBook Pro, just the standard keyboard. I'm not sure. Say just a little more. What do you mean it's so smooth? You mean the keys feel so smooth?
Right. So how do you tell where the up and down arrows are, where the command key is, where the F keys are? How do you decipher that?
Well, on the home row of this keyboard, there are little dots on the F and the J keys. So that makes it easy to line up on the home row with those little dots there. And once you're lined up on the home row, if you know how to touch type, then you know where the rest of the typing keys are. You know that the function keys are on the very top row. And you know that the arrows are on the right, and they're in this inverted T shape. And you know that the shift key and the enter key and the backslash key are just above them. So I mean, it's a matter of getting familiar with how to identify where you're at on the keyboard by touch. It's something I've done all my life. I don't even think about it. But for a lot of people, learning to find things on the keyboard, it certainly would be a challenge.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, one more?
Yeah. Do you have any recommended resources to reach for in learning more about this or listening to more details about current events?
Well, there are resources out there. There is a very excellent book written by Shelley Brisbane, and she updates it every year, of all about iOS accessibility. It's not specifically about Mac accessibility, but Shelley's book is a good resource, and it's at iOS book, iOS accessible. I don't know the website off my 68-year-old brain is failing me on the exact website. I would be happy to send that information. That would be one book. There's a book on using the Mac with VoiceOver, published by a company called the National Braille Press, which is available in print and Braille and electronic format. That would be another resource. I would be happy to put a few things together. I do a podcast called the Tech Doctor blog and podcast, which we've been doing since 2010, and it covers Apple accessibility. Especially, we do a podcast every time Apple has an event, and we approach it from whatever they've announced that new. We approach it from an accessibility standpoint, and there are other podcasts that provide similar information. So the good news is there's stuff out there. The bad news is, honestly, it's a bit challenging to track it down. I'm hoping that AI, ChatGPT, will help us some. You'll be able to soon say, give me all the resources on Apple accessibility, and lots of great things will pop up. I think that's happening, going to be happening, but it's a little bit piecemeal at the moment.
Charles has just put in the chat the link to Shelley is her name? Shelley Brisbane's book. So that is now in the chat for
Excellent.
folks. Yeah, who folks want that? And what's the other one? Is Robert's?
The other one is Shelley Brisbane's podcast.
Shelley
Parallel.
Brisbane's. Okay. And you want to?
Yeah, Parallels is a good resource.
Would you put Roberts in? The Tech Doctor? Oh,
the Tech Doctor blog and podcast. It's at dr-carter.com is the website.
All right, you should. Well, here I can do it. Dr. Say it again, yeah. Robert.
dr-carter.com, drcarter.com.
Okay. husband just took my keyboard. There you go. So it's going in the chat.
There we are.
Yeah, and so you know, and we've got since 2010 podcasts up there. If you want to go all the way back, and I don't think you would, but you can trace quite a history of what's happened over the last many years. Anyway, it has been my pleasure to have the chance to meet with you all. Thank you for your welcoming and your kindness. And if you should decide that you want to do more on accessibility, and you don't have to, but if you should decide, I'd be happy to come back and talk about Braille accessibility and touchscreen accessibility and all that stuff. I just knew I didn't have time to do all that tonight.
Right. Well, Robert, thank you for staying up for us. We really appreciate that part, especially.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So folks have learned a lot, and boy, it's really, really interesting and affirming. Really, really good. Thank you.